In the small, forgotten town of Ashford, nestled deep in the foggy heart of the American Midwest, people still spoke in hushed tones about the unspeakable horrors that had occurred years ago. The town had once been a bustling center for farmers and merchants, but now it was little more than a crumbling relic, overshadowed by the dark forests that surrounded it. But the darkest thing Ashford ever produced wasn't the eerie mist that clung to the trees or the strange wildlife that scurried under the moonlight. It was a man, a name that haunted the nightmares of anyone who dared utter it: the Whistler. His presence was never seen, but felt. He didn't hunt like most killers, he didn't need to. He was the shadow you couldn't shake off, the whisper you heard when no one was around. He played a different game, one of slow, torturous mind games, turning his victims' thoughts against them before they even realized what was happening. Victor Rain was the name that the town's elders whispered in fearful reverence. The name of the man who had lived among them for years before his crimes escalated. He was no monster in the traditional sense. He had no sharp blades or gruesome trophies. He didn't leave a trail of blood behind him. What he left instead was far worse: psychological scars that would never fade. His first victim had been a quiet young woman named Maggie Holloway. She was new to town, an outsider who had come to Ashford seeking peace, hoping to escape the weight of her past. But she didn't know that in Ashford, peace was a fleeting illusion. It started with a letter, a single, simple note left on her doorstep one cold morning. "I see you, Maggie," it read, "and you are mine now." At first, Maggie dismissed it as a prank. She wasn't the type to scare easily. But as the days went by, things began to change. She would find things moved in her home, subtle but unnerving signs that someone had been there. Her kitchen cabinet doors would be left open, her mirror fogged with breath after she'd cleaned it. And at night, when the wind howled outside, she would hear the softest whisper, a faint, almost musical sound that came from nowhere. Victor's method was always the same. He made them believe they were losing their minds. The isolation, the creeping paranoia, the sense that something wasn't right, that was his weapon. He didn't kill immediately. He twisted their sanity, broke them down, turned their own minds against them. Maggie grew more frantic as the days passed, hearing the whispering from the walls, the shadows in the corner of her eyes. She would lock every door, bolt every window, but the whispers never stopped. The darkness became her prison, and one night, after a week of relentless torment, Maggie disappeared without a trace. The town thought she had simply left. Maybe she'd snapped under the pressure. Maybe she had run away. But the reality was far darker. Victor watched as the town grew uneasy, his work done. He had turned her into a ghost of her former self before taking her, leaving only the most horrific memory to taunt them. He left no bodies, no signs of violence, just a mind broken by the horror of being watched. No one ever saw him coming. He could be anyone. He could be the friendly man next door, the farmer working late in the field, or the store clerk who smiled at you in passing. His greatest skill was blending in. As the years passed, the town of Ashford tried to forget, but the memory of Maggie and of others who had disappeared in similar circumstances lingered like the endless fog. Rumors spread that the Whistler was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Then came Sarah Jenkins, a curious journalist from the city, who arrived in Ashford with the intention of writing a piece on the eerie stories that had long plagued the town. She knew about the disappearances. She knew about the whispers. And she thought it was all just superstition, until she felt the pull of something cold and unseen. Sarah didn't believe in ghosts or curses or the supernatural, but she couldn't ignore the feeling, the suffocating dread. The way the very air seemed to grow thick with an unspoken tension, like something was watching her from the dark. At first, it was small things. Her notes on the missing persons would be rearranged. Her reflection in windows would seem off. The way her name would appear in strange, forgotten places, scratched into walls, etched into the bark of trees, written on bathroom mirrors, only visible when the fog touched them. And then the whistling began. Soft, eerie notes that danced on the edge of her hearing. The same haunting tune that had driven Maggie and so many others to madness. Sarah tried to confront the town, to ask questions, but no one would speak. It was as if they all knew, but refused to acknowledge the horror they lived in. She was alone now, and Victor's game was beginning again. The whispers grew louder. The fear crawled beneath her skin, paralyzing her. She could no longer tell if it was Victor she was hearing, or if she was losing herself. The worst part was that she wasn't alone anymore. She was with him, in the shadows, where his whispers would always be heard, always felt. As Sarah's mind fractured, the haunting became more intense. She found herself standing in front of a mirror, her reflection not matching her movements. In that moment, she understood. Victor had already won. He didn't need to kill. He had taken everything. Her sanity. Her identity. She was already a ghost, trapped within the labyrinth of her own mind. And then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the last note of the haunting whistle echoed through the air, and Sarah vanished. The town of Ashford never saw her again. But every time the fog rolled in, every time the wind howled through the trees, the whispers returned. Victor Rain was still out there, still hunting, and the game was far from over.